everyone, it is Friday, May 1st, and in the first month and a half absent of physical wrestling, there's still been a ton going on, so I want to talk about it. Essentially, I want to go through what's just some highlights and top stories from the last month, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to start with high school because there has been a lot of movement. I think a lot of athletic associations are in the process of going through their meetings right now, so we're seeing a lot of activity. So first of all, South Dakota and Oklahoma officially are sanctioned. That just happened in the last several weeks, so congrats to those two states and all that are involved. South Dakota honestly had, I believe, 36 girls wrestling at the high school level last year. So with such a low number, getting that sanctioning across, obviously they know it's onto a good move, so it's kind of crazy to think about other states that have upwards, like close to 1,000 girls wrestling and don't have it sanctioned. Like, that's absolutely wild. Oklahoma only had, I think, 96 last year, and of course these are numbers from last year. The number of participants this year in 2020 are projected to be up about, I think it's over 30% toward 28,000 in high school, but those numbers aren't official yet. So South Dakota and Oklahoma sanctioned. South Dakota is going to follow in the footsteps of Missouri, using 4 weight classes at the state tournament, and then Oklahoma has passed in their vote to add a girls division at the state tournament next season. So that's all good news. You know, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but with South Dakota, states like South Dakota sanctioning with 36 girls, I'm like, why aren't all states sanctioned at this point? Like, why are girls still wrestling boys? But I digress. That's opinion. So next up on the high school state list, Arizona has already sanctioned girls wrestling. However, they just passed a vote. They just passed a vote to make it an official team sport. And so what they're trying to do in Arizona is make it so that it's likened to the boys side. So they're trying to have all 4 boys divisions and then the girls division at one state tournament. So that is what's happening in Arizona. And then Florida, there's a lot going on in Florida as far as social media campaigning. Same with Pennsylvania, honestly. But Florida just last week unanimously voted they unanimously voted to endorse sanctioning in the state of Florida. So that's going to go up for vote in June, and that's obviously a big step forward. And then also on top of that, interesting. But on top of that, as far as high school goes, Alabama, there was a little bit of buzz going on that Alabama had sanctioned, but I went and did some research on the Alabama Athletic Association, and Alabama has not sanctioned girls wrestling, but they did take a big step forward and they sanctioned 3 events specific for girls. And you know, every state's governing process, governing rules and procedures are different, like everywhere. If you go to each state's association, which I have not done, just a couple, it has a different process for how a sport gets sanctioned, what makes it in its own division. Like, it's confusing. But as far as Alabama goes, if to have more than 3 teams competing at an event, it has to be sanctioned by the Alabama Athletic Association, or AHSAA Association. Okay, so essentially what they've done at this point, which is a big step for Alabama, is they've sanctioned 3 girls only events. And so that means that these girls can wrestle in these girls only events, but they also can still compete with the boys. And if they are to make it to state regions and sections of state, they're going to be in the traditional all boys group, right? Does that make sense? So that's what's happening in Alabama. So that kind of wraps up the high school stuff. Ann Reese did this wonderful video where she got a girl from all 50 states. They were like passing the shoe. It was really cute. I'll put a link to it. I thought it was really fantastic. I only mentioned a little bit about Pennsylvania. They're doing an initiative right now, Sanction PA, and that seems to be gaining a lot of traction. So, I mean, it's just a matter of time. It's really just a matter of time before all these states get on board, and there's just so much support in the high school level, and it's just growing so fast. So I'm excited to see where the national survey comes out this year as far as participation. And then, yeah, I'm excited for those numbers to come out. On the college level, as far as program growth, we had 2 new programs this month. One in North Carolina, that is St. Andrews. It's an NAI program, and it brings the NAI number count up to 36, which is 4 away from the 40 number that's a prerequisite for championship status. And then the second, and that's in Laurinburg, North Carolina. The second new program is Augustana University in Illinois, and at this point now there are 5 active programs in Illinois. I say active because at the very end of last month, they unfortunately lost the program at McMurray, so gained two within a week of each other, Augustana and Aurora, but lost McMurray. So Illinois is at 5 college programs, which is insane because Illinois has not sanctioned girls wrestling, and they're one of the ones with over 800 wrestlers in high school from last year. So interesting how that works out. And McKendree's there, North Central's there, and so yeah, I'm interested to see when Illinois is going to take the next step. If you think about all the talent that has come from that state, we have girls at all levels from that state, so it's interesting. The Division I Council vote for emerging sport status for women's wrestling has been postponed. So that was supposed to happen the weekend of April 20th, I believe. That has now been postponed to a date later this year. We don't have that date yet, but it's just been tabled. More information on that will come out. As we know, the NCAA Division I and II voted that women's wrestling will have emerging sport status as of August 1st, 2020. So headed in the right direction. It's going to be great. And like I mentioned before, there are now 37 programs in the NCAA that offer women's wrestling. And so just 3 away from that magic 40 number, which is very, very cool. On the NAIA side, Indiana Tech and Lourdes University joined the Mid-South Conference. This is noteworthy because there are now, like this year, there were 4 conferences that wrestled women's wrestling championships and brought women's wrestling into their conference. And that's big because as the NAIA makes more formal steps toward their championship status, which they did their 2-year prerequisite, even though the NAIA championship wasn't wrestled this year, they've been an invitational sport for 2 years, which was part of the criteria. There are now 4 conferences. We've got to start thinking that this is part of the formal framework that a championship sport will have within the NAIA. And so as we see more institutions with women's wrestling going to their appropriate conferences, I think we're going to start to see conversations about how regionals are going to take place and how that's going to impact qualifiers for nationals. So that's actually a big thing to note. The NAIA has definitely been on top of their game, and so it's good to watch. The NAIA and the NCAA have adjusted their requirements for standardized tests, and obviously, given the pandemic, we're in the situation that we're in right now. Tests have been canceled everywhere, and so these institutions have either waived or adjusted. So I have in here the exact quotes from the NAIA Eligibility Center. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but essentially it's going to be based on GPA. Eligibility is going to be based on GPA. And so both the NAIA and the NCAA D1, 2, and 3 are all going to have specific guidelines. But if you are an incoming freshman, I highly recommend communicating with your coach, making sure you're on the same page, because that's a really big deal. Yeah, it's a really big deal. It's good stuff. Honestly, one of my favorite stories from this month was that community colleges are going to get their own national championship starting next year. I think this is a huge deal. So as the WCWA kind of phases into whatever its next steps are, because the NAI and the NCAA have picked up women's wrestling, my questions really turn to, and like I've had conversations with a couple other coaches, like what's going to happen to the community colleges? Where are they going to compete at a national event, right? Because historically, the WCWA has been cross-organizational because no one college organization had women's wrestling under their umbrella, and now the NAI and NCAA do. And the community college, the 2-year programs, man, that's a little, I had to do some research here because I've never gone to a community college, and I didn't spend too much time learning about it earlier. And I started digging into it, and I realized that all these different organizations, all these different 2-year organizations have their own championships. So even when a sport is a championship sport, so say men's wrestling, for example, is a championship sport in the NJCAA and the California Collegiate Coalition and the NWAC, each of those 2-year organizations have their own championship. And so women's wrestling now is not considered a championship sport within community colleges. However, they are going to have a 2-year nationals, so a 2-year program's nationals, and this is all inclusive. Like, so this is going to include schools, for example, from the NJCAA, the CCAA, the NWAC, the USCAA, and then programs that are part of like the the NCWA, which is another organization where, I'm not going to get in that right now, but it's going to be all-inclusive and cross-organizational, and so that's going to be really great, and I think it's going to give validity to the 2-year programs. I think community colleges are highly underrated, and I think given the current situation, I think we're going to see an uptick in educational choices that are more trade-specific and or essentially focused. I don't know, just a thought, but this 2-year event is just that. It's an event. It's not another organization. It is just a place where 2-year programs can compete against each other. And I think it's going to be a really big deal. I'm so excited to see how it happens. I mean, right now I think there are 7 community colleges that offer women's wrestling. One of the new ones this year was Indian Hills in Iowa. And when you think about how community colleges work with 4-year institutions, man, I think it's a no-brainer that more 2-year programs are going to add women's wrestling. Like, I'm excited to see where it goes in the future. I feel like I had something else important to note there. Cannot remember it right now. The next thing, this is really big too. Abby Nettie was named the Open Mats Patricia Miranda Award winner for this year. And what that is, it's the Open Mats Prestigious Award and it goes to an individual who kind of embodies the spirit of the pioneers before her. And so Patricia Miranda was obviously one of the women's wrestling's pioneers. The Open Mat says the Patricia Miranda Medal aims to honor one outstanding athlete from women's college wrestling who embodies the spirit of the pioneers that came before her. And Abby, I mean, she was undefeated this season. She is now a 2-time WCWA All-American, not All-American, champion, but she's a 2-time WCWA champion, both at 130. Finished her senior year undefeated. She's on our senior national team. She won the U.S. Open in December. She was ready to rock and roll at nationals before the season got cut short. So well-deserved to Abby Nettie. Big deal. I highly recommend going to the Open Mat and reading their whole release on it, and then watching the interview that they did with her. It's good stuff. The voting panel for that too is just stacked. It's all the 4-timers for the WCWA. So Helen Maroulis, Vicki Anthony, Emily Webster, and Kayla Miracle. And I'll say this, Emily Webster earlier this year, I don't know if I mentioned it anywhere other than like another newsletter, but Emily Webster was actually inducted into the OCU's Hall of Fame, and I think it went way under the radar. She was great, so good stuff there. And then Dom Parrish, who was a 2-time WCWA champ, was also on that voting panel. In terms of new coaches this month, Barry Hart is joining Olympian Elena Parashkova at NJCU. He's a tenured career at the Beat the Streets New York since 2013, like 7 seasons with Beat the Streets. That's a big deal. And then they said he was named the 2019 Beat the Streets Assistant Coach of the Year. That's pretty impressive. Beat the Streets is a very, very impressive organization. They do a lot of good work. Maybe I'll dig up an article I did on them last year. Beat the Streets is a phenomenal organization. Then the other coaching change at Iowa Wesleyan, Sean Contos is taking over the men's and women's programs. He has coached alongside Cale Sanderson. He coached at Iowa State and Penn State. And Robert Powell, who spent the year recruiting for the Tigers last year, he has accepted a new position at New England College, so he is no longer with the program. And then the new program at St. Andrews, that's going to be Nick Soto leading that program. He is also the men's head wrestling coach as well. I believe this is going to be going into his second year at St. Andrews, but I am not positive on that. So other than that, I mean, I think the one story on here that I didn't highlight, it's been talked about pretty heavily in different forums, is the Hawkeye Wrestling Club. The ladies there, the word is they're all moving to Arizona, or I mean, maybe not all of them, but the word is most of them are moving to Arizona. I'm not going to comment on that very much because I don't know the ins and outs of it. I don't cover the senior team heavily, so that's what I'm going to say there. If you need to learn more, I mean, there's different perspectives in different places. Yeah, there's that. Other than that, I think, April was a month where we all had to learn to communicate in a very different way than we're used to. We've seen a lot of Zoom workouts, and we've seen a lot of different types of collaborations across social media. I think that it's been an incredibly challenging time and an incredibly growth-oriented time as well. And so I know everybody deals with this a little bit different. There's been a lot of adjustments, and I'm just really, really thankful that there's still so much momentum in the women's wrestling community and in the wrestling community in general. We have a lot of great supporters. Women's wrestling is it's on the rise. There's no denying it. The numbers show it, and it's just really exciting to be a part of. So that is all I have for today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful weekend or day whenever you watch this. Until next time, my name is Gabby.